Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. My name is Tara Woodley, and I am the president of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. It's an organization that gives survivors and families who have lost loved ones to domestic violence access to a community that understands the journey that they are facing. We hope this episode impacts you. And whether you're a survivor or you want to learn more about the topic, hopefully it's helping you in some way. If it is, let us know by leaving us a review. We love your feedback. Also, make sure to click the subscribe button so you will get notifications of each episode as it premieres. And hopefully, we will see you again in our next episode. Thank you for your support. To Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence's podcast, Through the Eyes of Survivors. And this month's episode, we're going to be talking about domestic violence and how it relates to addiction and substance abuse. And with me this month, I have Tammy Willett, who is our Legacy Family Coordinator, and Audrey Molzenberger, right, who is our secretary for the board of directors, and Gabby Turner, who is our community organizer here in the organization. So welcome, ladies. I'm glad you could join us for this topic. I think it's a very timely topic, especially with the holidays coming on, that there's a lot of a correlation between domestic violence and the abusive patterns that it has, right, as the effects of addiction. So both of them have a lot of similarities. And when you pair, drugs and alcohol and abuse, it escalates situations. So for topic of conversation, we're just going to talk about that and how it has related to all of us in our, survivorship and what we experienced. So I think I'd like to start with Audrey about, how did addiction play a role in your abusive relationship?
Well, in the beginning of the relationship, I didn't have a problem with drugs or alcohol. But as the relationship went on, I felt pressured. He would pressure me into having a drink, and then eventually it was, smoking or, whatever it was he was into at the time. And I was a mom, and I was an at-home mom, and I didn't like to feel the pressure of having to, party, because I had to go home and take care of the kids. And I understand how it was an escape, but then eventually it became a problem. At first I was reluctant, but then because of the pressure that he put on me, I caved, and I, gave in, and I allowed it to become an escape for him, like for me too. And then even leaving the relationship, it became too much of an escape, to where, you have a bad day and you're like, oh gosh, I need a drink. And then you needed it to cope with day to day. It became a problem, and it was never just one drink. And at the end, it's next month, it'll be 6 years that I've been sober. But I literally had to get to the point where, because it had become so big and I was so dependent on it, I literally almost lost my life. Lost my life so that for me to get sober. It was an escape that I was dependent on, and it became too much.
Right. So let's, ladies, talk more about that, about how it's used as an escape as for us as survivors. So, like, Gabby, can you touch on that some?
Oh, wow. I've been using drugs to escape in one form or another pretty much my entire life. My abusive relationship began when I was a child. I was 13 years old. And he was already at 17, a very heavy daily drinker. Now, I was never a drinker. Mine was more everything else. But I had used that to cope to cover up the pain, to cover up my feelings. So I didn't have to process what was really happening to me, what I was involved in. I was able to continue the facade of this is a normal relationship. And the addiction for me was numbing. It was just keeping myself disconnected from the relationship, disconnected from the trauma, disconnected from my entire family. If I don't think I can recall many times that I was really present with my children when they were growing up because I was always under the influence of something. And then with my ex, if he didn't have, alcohol or whatever his drug of choice was, the abuse was even worse. It wasn't until I began to get clean. I'm almost at my 3.5 year mark. Audrey, congratulations on your 6.
Yes.
That I realized addiction is so much a part of domestic violence because domestic violence is addiction. You are addicted to the highs and to the lows of the relationship. So
Absolutely.
to cope with those in between moments is where the addiction comes in, because you're not getting your fix from the high, you're not getting your fix from the low, and you're just kind of stuck. That's where I really learned that, okay, to heal from my addiction, I also had to heal from my addiction to pain, to my addiction to abuse, to my addiction to the cycle of the abuse. It wasn't just my drug addiction I had to heal. I had to heal it all. And that's when I was finally able to get sober.
Right. And it has to be an inclusive approach on that, right? Because like you brought up a valid point of how the relationship itself in abuse and stuff can be so addicting, because you, in a way, you're feeding a cycle just like you would with addiction. So Tammy, you have a little different perspective with yours, and so would you like to talk about that for a little bit?
My biggest thing that I have learned through my addictions is I didn't use drugs or alcohol to get high. It wasn't about partying. It was about disappearing. If I was asleep, then it didn't hurt so bad. It didn't suck so bad. That stemmed from, in the beginning, childhood shame. Those wounds that we acquire, if we don't fix them, we will medicate them. And that was my thing. I rationalized and justified my addiction because all of my pills were, and my addiction was to pills. They were all prescribed to me. So I wasn't buying drugs on the street. I wasn't getting them illegally. But that's not to say that I didn't take them like they were prescribed either. So I rationalized and justified that I wasn't an addict. I was taking my medicine. That was a lie. I had an entire system down to where my anxiety medicine, which should have lasted me 30 days, was gone in 2 weeks. But then it would be time to get my sleep medication refilled. That would last me a week. And then it would be time. And I just had it set up, this system, and it was a matter of disappearing. If I could take a pill and go to sleep, then I didn't have to deal with the chaos of the abuse and the things. It was just my way of not dealing. And I even compared it to smoking pot and other things that, no, this, I'm not an addict. I'm not doing illegal drugs. I wasn't doing street drugs. I was a full-blown addict, and I hid it for so long. It wasn't until I lost my daughter that I just stopped hiding it. I was always an addict, always. At that point, though, I just didn't care who noticed. I can remember going to church pilled up and thinking, well, I'm here, staggering down the aisle. No, I was stone cold. I hadn't been hitting the bottle, but I was messed up. And I just didn't care who saw. And that's when I realized that I needed to heal me.
Right.
And there was a point here when we first moved into Corpus Christi where I was on the edge of getting some prescription pills. And I actually purchased them and brought home and flushed them down the toilet. And I found a program here locally that was outpatient. I didn't realize until I was in it that you got one-on-one counseling, and it was a big group setting. But I didn't realize that everybody there was court ordered. I was the only person who actually had put myself in this outpatient program. And they were like, really, you're here because you want to be? And I was like, I don't want to lose me again. I don't want to lose who I am. And that's the biggest thing that I lost in my addiction, was I lost who I was. So.
Yeah. And see, and that's what we're talking about within the discussion, right? So like the correlation between that with domestic violence, you tend to lose yourself and your identity. And yet here in addiction, you do the same thing. So like, what other things do you think kind of correlate in that manner? Like that would be the same, that the two are almost one, that you can't separate?
I would say the justification. So like Tammy was saying, like, she justified, and I did the same thing. I started off, my opiate addiction started off on prescription pain medicine for my neck. And the way, come to find out, it was actually just how trauma was presenting itself in the body. But well, that's another podcast, I think.
Yeah, right.
But you justified your addiction. I justified me taking pain pills, which, like you said, Tammy, would not last me, were not taken as prescribed at all. But I justified it because I was getting this from a doctor and I was in pain. So we also justify our abuse in our relationships. Yes. But if I would have done this, he wouldn't have done that. That's the justification. That's the trying to say, oh, everything's okay. Just like the doctor wrote you a prescription to be abused. That's not, regardless of the means, it's still damaging to you. And anything that's damaging to you and it can become an addiction. The brain loves a pattern. Abuse is a pattern. Addiction is a pattern. Justification is a pattern. You're not justifying the abuse when it's happening. You're usually not justifying the abuse the next day, but as the days go on, you're justifying it more and more and more, and finding ways that you can, remove yourself from that, your responsibility of it. Not saying that being abused is you're responsible for that, but your responsibility to say, okay, this is happening to me, to own it and to gather the strength to walk away from it.
Right.
Man, something
Yes.
that you pointed on, Gabby, was the patterns. The patterns of addiction that I have found, that I'm still an addict, recovery, but I'm still an addict. I still make excuses and rationalize and justify constantly. I feel like, and I did that in my abusive relationship. I had to rationalize and justify to make everything seem and appear okay, for it to balance. And rationalizing and justifying my mistakes, or whenever I forget to do something around the house, my husband will call me, okay, Tammy, rationalize and justify much. And those addiction behaviors, as well as going along with domestic violence and being in an abusive relationship, those are really hard to break, even when you're not in that cycle anymore. It manifests in other areas of our normal, healthy lives. That's like frustrating. And I want to kick myself in the butt when Steve will call me out on, all right, rationalize and justify. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing it, aren't I? So anybody else have anything with that?
I will say that even after I left the relationship, the longer time went on of me not, admitting what was going on, the less I saw of myself, the more it's like I started to show signs of, like, I was becoming that monster that I ran from, which is really, it was really hard. It was like I had fought to get out of that relationship and find myself, I was losing myself. I had to break that cycle, not only break the cycle of domestic violence, but then, you realize that, like Tammy said, that, you have all of these addictive kind of qualities that we latched onto in order to survive. And it's hard to find that balance. It takes time, and it takes counseling, and it takes, real hardcore effort, and actually looking in the mirror and saying, oh my gosh, like I'm in the bad, like owning up to that is really hard. And even being, like Tammy said, even being sober, it's hard to find that new balance, and actually allowing yourself the time to not react to whatever the trauma is that's going on, because life sucks and things come at us, but it's hard to find we're so used to just kind of reacting it and trying to preserve that it's easy to kind of get back into those addictive. You hit the nail on the head, Tammy. I feel like I'm always trying to balance so that so that way I don't fall back. Even being sober from that, sure, great, but being sober and living a sober life and finding balance is really, really hard to do.
Right.
Yeah, I think just one more correlation between addiction and abuse. To get clean, you need two things. You have to make a decision. I mean, a real concrete decision, and you have to have faith. To leave an abusive relationship, you have to make a decision, a real decision.
That's good.
And
Right.
you have to have faith that you're going to be okay. And those are two, I think that is one of the strongest correlations that I've found, that for both of those, and you have to heal from both of those. So it becomes a messy work, but it's worth it.
Amen.
Something that I realized is that I decided that the life that I have, losing my daughter, everything that I have, all of my self-destructive patterns, it's painful life, but it was painful, and it was depressing, and it was sad with or without those pills. So, my drug dealer was the doctor's office. So, it's just like the alcoholic is a liquor store. So when we moved to Corpus Christi, I made my husband go with me to those first doctor's visits to make sure that I had that conversation, just as my accountability person, to make sure that it was there and make sure that I actually had it documented in my records so that they knew, straightforward, you don't need to give me these things. Because that's a hard conversation, and you just have to do it. And dealing with pain, I mean, my daughter's never coming back. My past, I can't erase. It is as checkered as a checkerboard, but it's going to be that way with or without medicating that pain away. So that was the turning point in my addiction, where I said, no, it hurt with or without it. So at least I feel, and even when I feel bad, I try to remind myself that I'm feeling, and that's a good thing.
Right. Because a lot of times you don't want to feel anymore, right? That's a part of the thing, that you're feeling too much. It's too much at once, and to numb the experience of what you have going on.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. We wanted to pause for a moment and let you know that Through the Eyes of Survivors shop is now open. This is a great way for you to not only help survivors of domestic violence, but let everyone else know that you will not be silent on this very important issue. From t-shirts to bags to coffee mugs, we have so much to choose from. To grab swag, head to store.breakthesilencedv.org. That's store.breakthesilencedv.org. I can't say enough how much we appreciate you, and that the organization is blessed by your generosity. We hope you enjoy the rest of this episode and you continue to subscribe to our podcast. Thank you.
You know, how do you think in each of your relationships that affected your children who are watching? Let's talk about the children in the background for a little bit. So, like, I know with I myself wasn't had the addiction, he had the addiction, and I knew what he was trying to lure me into drinking or doing drugs with him, which I did succumb and did that on occasion, how awful I'd feel. But I thought that I was hiding it well from my children, right? But I wasn't. They saw it all, they saw the whole thing and the effects of that from my daughters, letting me know that, they saw me have those moments of when I was drunk or whatever, and then the escalation into the violence that would happen afterwards and how it affected them was so traumatizing. And I thought personally I was keeping more of the peace by doing it with him because of the arguments that would come if I didn't do it with him, right? So what kind of effects did you see with your children as you had your experiences?
So I'm going to take accountability, responsibility, because I knew no other way to cope with pain, with abuse, with trauma, with daily life other than using. I then taught my children and showed my children that using helps you cope. Being high in one way or another will help you cope through something. My youngest daughter, thankfully, wants nothing to do with anything that relates to the name D. She doesn't even take ibuprofen unless it's like an absolute emergency. My oldest, though, who witnessed so many more years of the abuse. I've been free for 9 years now. My youngest is 15, so she was relatively young when I left. But my oldest witnessed it, a lot of it. And, she's older now and she's dealing with her own battle with addiction, that I am blessed enough and grateful that I am able to be here and to be sober and to be on the other side of that, to help and guide her through that. But I think that's one of the biggest effects that it had on my kids, was teaching them that it's okay to numb your brain and to numb your feelings to cope, instead of teaching them to cope with trauma and to cope with pain and to cope with daily life. Because even at my age, being 3.5 years sober, I'm just learning these skills. I didn't know how to cope with anything. My mother never taught me to cope with anything. It was, you'll be okay, just move on.
Hello. Suck it up.
Yeah. Suck it up, buttercup. That, yeah. Or
let me give you something to cry about. And I think that,
to
me, that's the worst. I wasn't able to support them and teach them coping mechanisms. And it's hard. It's sad to watch now. I have a lot of, I don't want to say regret, because there's nothing I can do to change that. But going forward with my grandson, I make sure to make it a point to teach him to do this, and to also now begin to teach my kids as I'm on my journey.
Right. Well, and that's the struggle, right? So you have to, as mothers, we always have that fear of the kids are going to do the exact things that we did not set the example, right? And then sometimes that can be part of like what you're coping with. I would imagine with the addiction also is that it feeds into it as well. Do you think so, Audrey?
I absolutely agree. And Gabby, you hit the nail on the head when you have to talk about the accountability. Like when I was in it, I could deal with whatever came my way. And it wasn't, and it breaks me when I think about the effects that it has on the kids. It wasn't until I saw my reflection in their eyes that I could, even make the decision to say, okay, I broke the cycle of domestic violence, but I didn't break the cycle of addiction. And it took
Right.
that reflection and that accountability in order for me to change it. And it's really hard. I feel like we become professionals at hiding it because we're hiding our feelings, we're hiding everything. We become professionals at hiding the abuse, at hiding our feelings. It's like we have to be 10 steps ahead to keep the monster at bay, that we become, ignorant to our own feelings, and we're trying so hard to keep ourselves alive and to keep them alive. Like I thought that because they didn't actually see the abuse, that they didn't witness it. And it wasn't until we left the relationship and we started going through counseling that completely changed the trajectory of our lives. But that didn't remove all of the pain and everything that they heard. My 8-year-old child was punching a hole through a wall, and he never saw the abuse. It broke me. It broke me that this was something that, even though I thought that I was keeping them safe, that they were still not safe. It took years of counseling. It took years to undo what was done. And it, like I said, it was not until I saw my reflection in their eyes that I was able to say, okay, I undid, not undid, but we escaped and broke that cycle. But now here, let's do the work for something else. It's hard. And I think that, like Abby said, we can undo what's already been done. But every day, sobriety, we make a choice to say, okay, I can't undo the pain that was caused to them, but they can look at their mom and say, she broke the cycle. My kids are so proud of me now. And I feel like they're teaching me. And that's something that sobriety is worth. Like that's what keeps me sober every day, is that I can't undo the pain that I caused them, but I can make it right every day and choose that. I can't even choose me, but I can choose them every day, because I see myself through their eyes now, like through the eyes of the survivor. When I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense, because I literally see my reflection in them, and that keeps me sober every day. Sorry.
No, you're
awesome.
Weird.
But no, it's true, Audrey. It's hard.
My son, through losing his sister, he was 18 at the time. He handled her death just like I did, just like I taught him, through medicating. And that medicating was different than mine, but he isolated himself. He shut down, and it took him through our judicial system. And he was in the consequences, everything short of death. He sat with the devil for 2 years, and he made a decision that is not for me, and I'm never living like this again.
Right.
When my son went away, I didn't like him. I love him because I gave birth. I love my son. I did not like my son, the addict. When he came home, I had my son back. And I've had my son, the boy I gave birth to, granted he's 30, for 5 years now. He has an amazing girlfriend, completely drug-free, has an amazing life. I got him back, but he handled death and life's bad experiences just like I taught him. By example is by let's just medicate it however that works for you. Now he has an amazing girlfriend that he's been with for 5 years. I have my son back. They were over here yesterday, and I just can't ever hug him enough, because that's my boy. He has a key to my house. I sent him home with a key a while ago. My old son, I wouldn't have given him a key. I wouldn't have given me a key.
Let's be honest.
When we start sobriety and we leave the abuse, we are given a new key to a new life, to a healthy, trustworthy healthy, just amazing life.
I think addiction also not only re-victimizes the survivor, but also re-victimizes the kids, because they're trying to heal from the abuse that they witnessed. Their family's broken apart. That's enough all in itself. And then they have a mother who is in active addiction. And I was a functional addict for 20 years. I mean, I worked, I took care of the kids, I did everything I was supposed to do. And when, the relationship ended, I was still in active addiction. So the kids then became a victim of my addiction. And that re-victimization of them, I don't know which was worse. If you want me to be honest, I don't know if it was, me leaving or being in an abusive relationship, or them losing their mother for a time to the addiction. I don't know which was worse.
A really good point.
I think it's equal.
Yeah. And what is some of the coping mechanisms that you saw your children, besides, we talked about like some that they had during that time period, you think, that you saw that you could have other parents look at them as far as what's happening in that space as you're going through it, that your child may be detaching or heading that direction to where they may lead into self-medicating and addiction themselves?
For me, looking back, hindsight's always 2020, is my daughter acting like everything was just fine.
Yep.
And it wasn't just fine. It's still not just fine. And I think that, to me now, looking back, should have been my first, hold on, I think we all need to go for some help, because, we all just experienced something very traumatic. I mean, not just one time, over the course of their entire lives. And everybody, once he left, everybody just kind of went about their day. Like nothing happened.
Yes.
Like, you know what I'm saying? It was kind of one of those, like, I feel like we would have mourned more for a pet that we lost, than actually a trauma that we experienced. So that, to me, now looking back, was probably the biggest red flag in her acting like everything's just fine. And even with extra with the just fine, hanging out more than normal, or, just being extra and doing what we always try to do and hide the abuse. Like when we knew people may see into it, we were extra to make sure that everybody saw this was a nice, happy home. Like the kids do the same thing. They're extra. They help out more around the house. They're doing stuff that a normal kid probably wouldn't be doing.
I think, Gabby, that's the number one red flag in my situation as well, was everything's fine. I'm fine. And he wasn't. None of us were.
Well, I think that we wanted so desperately to move past it, that even when I was in my addiction, they didn't want to, I think that they didn't want to admit it. I mean, it was easy for me to be in denial, but I think it was also easy for them because they had worked so hard and moved so far past, leaving an abusive relationship and environment, that they didn't, I think it was easy for them to kind of be in denial too, that I had a problem, which, I mean, that's just another, heartbreak for them, so it is, I'm fine. My daughter, when we left, she was 3 years old, and she was in play therapy. That's how little she was. So she really, she was really young, processing and learning how to talk about things and all of that. But, going through the years and seeing me develop an addiction and trying to be fine and be perfect and still being 10 steps ahead to make sure that they're safe, they're taken care of, they're alive, I'm doing the right thing. They're, we get them involved in things so that they could, have a picture, like Gabby was saying, like have everything together. But we never actually took the time to really talk about it. We learned through therapy to go through it and process it, but they don't teach you how to get past it. Like let's have a conversation, 10 years down the road. Okay. And really say, okay, are we okay? Because we didn't really want to talk about it after we went through it. Nobody wanted
Right.
to.
That's the hard part, Audrey, because I don't know about you guys, but trying to get my kids to talk about that time in their life. I've had a big thing with me coming out now, sharing my story, appearing on podcasts such as this or YouTube channels. They don't want me to share. And I'm like, let me talk to you. Let me tell you my story. Let me talk to you about it. You talk to me about how my story affected you in the then and now. And they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about how it affected them, how the abuse affected them, how my addiction affected them, how reading news articles about me, I was bad. I went to jail, and it was a very public thing. So their friends knew, and they still to this day don't want to talk about it. So Audrey, you make a great point that they just don't want to, they teach you therapy, but the aftermath is you still have to deal with this now. And it's very difficult.
Yeah, I tend to see, like with my children, they had the polar opposite effect. You have the one child, I have the one child who wants to compartmentalize everything. She puts it in nice, tidy little boxes, and she only pulls down what she wants to deal with, which is whatever's happy and everything fine, everything's great. And she doesn't want to look at anything that was bad or negative or that affected her in any way. She doesn't want to talk about it. And then you had the other child who was very much out there like, woohoo, this happened and it was bad. And I'm going to show the whole world how bad got, because like, I'm in pain. I'm so much in pain. I'm going to show everybody my pain for the whole world to see. And I don't think there is a happy medium when it comes to that. You either have your children react in one area or the other, and helping them to, break through and talk about it either direction, is very hard to deal with. Tammy, what do you think?
I think that what I'm hearing here is we are really, it's sitting here and talking that I'm an addict. And to admit that publicly is hard. Just the same as sitting here and saying, I was in an abusive relationship. So what I hear is we tried to hide it. Everything's fine. Everything's good. And we did that. That's kind of universal here. I see they're kind of both of those things are like intertwined. Same pattern.
I feel like there's hope though. Like with the newer generations, like when we were growing up, we didn't talk about anything. I don't remember.
Oh no.
You didn't talk about it. You just sit there and be quiet and we're talking about it, and like for us, it's we are breaking our silence, and I feel like there's hope for the newer generations because things are talked about. Things are not kept quiet anymore. And I feel like, for my daughter, she's, she just celebrated 1 year of no self-harm. And I'm so proud of her. And I think that because so many people are still not talking about things, or there are things that are uncomfortable, the younger generations are like, hey, let's talk about this. We got a problem. But, and there's, I feel like there's hope because of that. And, maybe we're really, onto something, breaking our silence at this time, because the younger generations are going to carry that and break it too easier, maybe.
With us, like you said, breaking our silence now, a speaker I follow said, this isn't the time to know, but this is the time to know how. So with our experience, we are able to teach them the how, because we didn't just come out of the relationship and just move on with our life. I did for,
we did for a minute.
Not the first 6 years, but then I had realized, and this came with my sobriety, that if I did want to be okay, truly okay, not what everybody else sees okay, but truly okay, is I had to heal from it all. I had to heal from the addiction. I had to heal from the abusive relationship. I had to heal from the childhood trauma. I had to heal stuff that wasn't even mine.
Yep.
I had to heal because it affected me. And now that I am on that journey, which I don't think you're ever really healed, I think there's always going to be work to do. I am able to guide my kids when they do, or anybody for that matter, when somebody comes to me and asks me how, I am able to give them the how, because I have been chosen for this journey and I chose to journey to keep going and to walk my path.
Well, and use it for good is the biggest thing,
Right.
One thing is that, like, for example, my daughter, she sees me and she hears me talking about it. And so she was able to do it for herself. And she wants to have uncomfortable conversations with people, like, because she sees that the power in it to use it to turn it around and help somebody else. I think that's the biggest part of it, is to be able to say, okay, yeah, I went through this crap, but there was good that came out of it because we're turning around and we're helping somebody else.
In my family, you didn't talk about stuff like this. You didn't talk about addictions. You didn't talk about domestic violence. You didn't talk about the important stuff. There were so many conversations that just never happened.
Right.
So I'm a huge embarrassment to some of my family members, because I'm going to just continue and throw myself under the bus. I will own my past, because I'm a firm believer that if you don't own it, then it owns you. And I've been owned and controlled by my addictions and by my abusive relationship and by so many other things in my life. I'm going to own this, and I'm going to put it out there straightforward right away, because if you look it up on paper, it's right there for the whole world to see. So I'm going to tell it to you before you figure it out, because then I'm in control. I'm in the driver's seat of my life. An addiction doesn't control me. A abusive partner does not control me. I'm in the driver's seat. And I think that that's what we can, when you take control of that driver's seat, you quit. Secrets are sick. They're just sick. Mm-hmm. And I'm not getting those secrets anymore. And I feel sorry for several of my family members because they're so silent. And I'm like, what secret do you, what secret are you keeping? And it's sad. And I'm an embarrassment, and I'm sorry. I'm Tammy Willett. I'm an addict. I was in an abusive relationship, and it all sucks. And I'll just talk about it.
Well, it's exhausting to all the time try to keep those skeletons in the closet.
Yes,
you know what I mean? It is just exhausting. And there's just so much freedom just opening that door and let it all out. There's a lot of freedom that comes with that. And so, I choose to, live mine to where that's an open door. And I think with children, you have to have that open door. Those skeletons in the closet for generations can go on for generations and generations. Yes. And then nobody knows how this all started or how you all began. And so you have to break that cycle. I think part of that breaking that cycle is just throwing open that door. And clean the closet. Yeah.
Clean house. Let's do this. Because we've already put our kids through enough. We don't want them to suffer more. I do not want my children to continue to feel pain and to cope in negative ways. I want them to break their cycles too, because man, that cycle is so hard to break. It almost cost me my life. Horrible.
So we've skirted around some talking about healing. So let's delve into that a little bit more. So if somebody is watching and they're in an abusive relationship and they're experiencing this with addiction as well in there, what would you ladies say would be the first steps to healing? And then what kind of healing journey did you take that you would kind of recommend for somebody? What helped you in your healing? I know we talked a little bit about, therapy and things, but let's get into that a little more in depth. Tammy, we'll start with you this time.
Oh, first and foremost, if you're in that abusive relationship, you have to look at it and look through the eyes of a survivor. Quit being that victim and acknowledge what the situation really is. Acknowledgement and owning it. and then getting out safely and make sure that you make it out alive. That's the first steps. But then I had a great support system, and that has dwindled because I realized that some support systems are just meant for a season. But I have those people in my corner that know the good, bad, and the ugly, and they've never wavered on their support. And forgiving myself. First and foremost, I had to forgive me. And I had to give myself a huge dose. I'm really good at giving the rest of the world a whole lot of grace when they've wounded me so horribly. The hardest part was giving myself that same grace. And just being okay with forgiving me.
Right.
And then reaching out and filling your toolbox with different coping mechanisms. That outpatient program here that I participated in was probably one of the greatest, because I had one-on-one with a counselor who I would go in there and she would call BS on my answers to her questions and say, no, you need to that's crap, Tammy. Having that person, so individual one-on-one with a dependable counselor. And there are free counseling programs out there. This was generally a court-ordered drug and alcohol program. And I checked in as an outpatient free, and I received some of the greatest counseling, a peer-to-peer support, that I started gaining tools to ensure. And I hadn't even relapsed, but I was thinking about it. And it terrified me, just the thought of losing me again. So filling yourself with things that you can do when you're on that edge again, because you're going to come back to that edge. Life is full of ups and downs, valleys and mountains, and you got to be prepared. And if you don't have any coping tools, you don't have any tools in your box, then chances are you're going to, but it starts with acknowledgement and forgiving yourself.
Absolutely. Audrey, you want to expand on that?
I will say that, like, for me, I'd never heard of domestic violence. I didn't know what it was. I knew that I had a problem in my marriage. It wasn't until I was educated. It wasn't until I was in an emergency shelter with my children that I filled out a questionnaire, 50 personality traits of an abuser. And I checked off 49 out of 50. And it was literally like a light bulb went off in my head. And it took that for me to realize that, okay, there wasn't anything that I could have done, like the whole 10 steps ahead and walking on eggshells and all that. There's nothing that I could have done or said that would have changed it. It was learning. It was educating myself and understanding that there was an actual problem, and without intervention, it wasn't going to get better. Because believe me, I tried to pray that boy saved. I tried, whatever. We moved. There was nothing I could have done differently. And like Tammy said, counseling, counseling and actually educating yourself and figuring out and walking through the steps and understanding all of that helped as well. But I really feel like a big part of it, we have, even if you have a support system, I pushed out all of my support system away because I wanted to hide it. Even if you do have a support system, for those of you that are blessed with an incredible family and friends and all that, surround yourself with women that have been through this, because we speak a language that no one can speak have they not walked the road. So when we tap in to a group of women, group therapy is so empowering. There is nothing more empowering than a woman that is empowered, because we've gone through the fire and we go back in and we bring each other, that's just who we are. It's in our nature. And
Right.
There's so much good that comes from being around local women that are either ahead of you and have walked and know that the resources that are in your community or that are behind you, and you're walking it together. I feel like that is the most empowering thing that we could do, is we learn and we want to share it and we want to help someone. So I think that is really important, is that we tap into the resources that are around us and lean on the women that actually speak our language, because otherwise you're talking to someone and it's Greek.
Yep.
And for me, the most important piece was my faith. Just getting to the point where I was at the end of myself. I couldn't deal with like Tammy said, you have to give yourself grace. I could not undo what I had done, but I could make a decision and cry out to God and say, look, I need your help. I need your help. Help me understand that I can make this right. Help me believe that everything that I've been through, that there's a purpose there. And, I will say this, when I was in the emergency shelter and I was walking down the hallways and there were these plaques on the doors that were bold and they had someone's name on it. And I was like, okay, I didn't understand it, but they were women that had gone to the shelter and left and were murdered by their abuser. And knowing that they had got help and got out and then gone back, that broke my heart. I didn't want to, it also made me feel bad, where you're like survivor's guilt. Turning to my faith in God, he helped me realize that there was purpose. He got me out. I survived it. I broke the cycle. My children broke the cycle. Understanding that there is purpose and we can turn it around and use all of that horrible, shameful, I'm a recovering addict. I will wear that badge. Yes, you can call me every name in the book, but that's what I did. It's not who I am. And in order for me to see that, I had to reach out to God in order for me to lose the blinders and for him to help me see it. And so now my days are filled with my faith and my purpose. And so that's why I'm here, so that I can help, God can help me use it for good. And that keeps me sober.
That's it.
Yeah. Just to touch on that, what you were saying, about support groups and stuff, I think support groups are so wonderful because as women, we tend to you heard the analogy of you need to fill your own cup, right? We pour out so much from our own cup, but we forget to fill it back. And I think when you've been through trauma or you're in addiction or different areas, that these support groups become like the pitcher that is full. And they help pour back into you at times when you can't pour back into yourself. So I think support groups are just really wonderful. We've seen in this organization how well support groups help our sisterhood and the trauma we've endured. So I think that's a wonderful place to be. Gabby, what would you add?
So I don't know if I'm really adding anything because these two wonderful women are, they send it so well. For me, I think it's more putting it in a step-by-step summary. When I decided to get sober, and you guys got to excuse my language during this one, I got sick of my own shit. Right. I got sick of my own shit. This had nothing to do with anybody else. I got tired of living in the relapse recovery. Yes. And Audria, like you were saying, these women that left the relationship and then went back, that's another correlation between abuse and addiction, is understanding the relapses are part of the healing. And it is part of the recovery because you have to remind yourself what you don't want to go back to. But like addicts, survivors that go back one more time, they sometimes don't make it out. And I can't tell you how many, friends that I lost that just used one more time. And that was it. The women that just went back one more time and that was it. That was their last, they didn't have another one. But after you get sick of your own shit and you call yourself out on it, you have to call yourself out on these behaviors that are damaging to you, that are damaging to your children, that are damaging to your family, but more importantly, that are damaging to your sobriety. Like you
Right.
have to call yourself out on these and write a list, write it down. Like, get it out of your head and put it on paper. Cause let's face it, we're all really good at beating ourselves up. We just don't do it constructively. And calling yourself out is doing it constructively. It's not beating yourself up for it. It's acknowledging I have a problem, whatever that problem may be, whatever that addiction may be. I have a problem. The other one is to ask for help. And asking for help looks very different to everybody. So, for example, Audrey, you went into a shelter, you were in intensive therapy, so on and so forth. Tammy, you also did counseling, you did rehabilitation, recovery. I did not. I am very stubborn. I do not recommend this for anybody. I recommend counseling. I recommend for you to join support groups, to go into recovery. This was just my path. I realized that there was a lot I didn't know. So my version of asking for help was searching YouTube and finding people like Audrey said that have experienced what I have. They're on that other side. So success leaves clues. Find somebody you relate to, even if you don't have access to them, and follow their path. Success will always leave you clues. And then that path takes you to somebody else's path that may be another step forward. Maybe you can get something from here. Joining this organization has helped me so much to be surrounded by women who they know what this is. They know. And validation from yourself and validation from others will help you heal. The other final thing I did, well, two things, was build new habits. As we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, that addiction is a habit. Abuse is a habit. It's a cycle. So to get clean, I had to, where in the mornings I would wake up, drink a cup of coffee, take a pill and scroll my phone. I now wake up in the mornings, I stretch, I get a cup of tea, I journal. You have to change everything into new healthy habits. And the final thing that helped me stay sober was purpose. Like Audrey said, I don't care what that purpose is. I believe my purpose is to help women who are in my position, to make that imprint and leave my footprint. Your purpose may be just to be the best mom that you can possibly be. That's your purpose. I don't care how big or small you may feel like it is. Once you find a purpose, I promise you, sobriety will become natural, because you will start pouring everything you poured into your addiction. You will start pouring it into your purpose. And that is what kept me and keeps me where I am today.
Awesome. That's incredible. That's great, Gabby. I love that. So just to turn the subject just a little bit, let's look at it as a perspective from being advocates. Okay. So I thought maybe here at the end, we talk just a little bit about that, as far as like the statistics show, like, which kind of floored me when I was looking at them. 80% of domestic violence incidents involve alcohol or drugs. They said something like 90% of domestic violence murder rates involve them as well. And I know personally, being an advocate over the course of the years, how law enforcement comes to those calls even, or does what they need to do within those situations. There's a room for a lot of improvement. I've seen over the years, some law enforcement does really well. They keep in mind that that's what these calls are, and other law enforcement agencies tend to ignore it because they think, okay, these people are drunk or they're on drugs or stuff, and they don't even look at the cycle of what abusive nature is going on in the call. So as advocates, what kind of changes would we like to see in these areas that might help our first responders and other things out there to become more aware? Maybe, Audrey, you want to go first this time?
Gosh, that is, the statistics are crazy. And before I answer that, I do want to say that a woman will leave her abuser 7 times before she finally leaves. I remember that when Gabby was speaking, but like the statistics that you just spoke they're outrageous. And I feel like, with law enforcement, maybe they don't have the tools, or they're not trained on how to de-escalate, and it's easy to minimize and say, oh, there's alcohol involved, but maybe educating and training, pushing for training for law enforcement. And I mean, even teachers, because they're with our children, I also volunteer for the emergency shelter that my children and I went to. And I'm on their prevention team, and we go into the schools and we talk about domestic violence based on, elementary level, junior high and high school, in the colleges, like it's educating and talking about it, letting them know, that way we can reduce those statistics. The ages of 14 to 24 are like the most have the highest rates of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. I feel like it's education. That maybe.
Yeah. Well, Gabby, what do you think?
So I agree 1,000%. Education has to be number one, but also educated leadership. So I had an issue where I had contacted law enforcement. They did absolutely nothing. I reported it to his superior, who was even more ignorant than the officer. So I think without the leadership in the police force and in the first responders not being highly educated, not holding their officers accountable for not handling these situations properly, is a really huge step in that just accountability that, we can help, we can get involved. And I wish I knew the scientific term, but people ignore stuff thinking that somebody else is going to take care of it. Right. People don't make that phone call to the police because they feel like somebody else is going to. An officer didn't deal with that call because he knows that next week we're going to get a call again and another officer is just going to have to deal with it. So that is the, saying, I'm here right now. How can I help this situation? How can I help these people? And really give the resources that's necessary, as, once again, when that leadership, because even at a regular job or in your regular day-to-day or at school, if your peer tells you you're not doing something right, 9 times out of 10, you're going to blow them off. But if your leadership and your superiors are coming to you saying, no, this is handled incorrectly, we may start seeing some more changes.
All right. Yeah. Do you think that it's a type of complacency, or is law enforcement becoming jaded a little bit with so many calls, or a little bit of both? What do you think, Tammy?
I think that it's, yes, they're very jaded. They've become almost numb to the situations. What I've seen, and especially in my hometown, which is also the town that my daughter was murdered in, and I still get calls today about their situations. And it's training. They need training. They need training. They need training. And they need a set of guidelines that they will not deviate from. They are there to keep the peace, to serve and protect. And they need to leave the personal judgments of the situation, their personal opinions, out of how they handle that situation. Because it's when they look at them and think, oh, they're drunk. They're just drunk and fighting. It's not your place to decide that. You have so it's training. And I think it needs to be regimented, maybe. I don't know.
Doesn't society as a whole even have that kind of perspective once you stop and think about it? The neighbors and everything, oh, they're drunk, so why interfere or why get involved? So conversations like this are really the key, right?
Yes, there needs to be exactly like, okay, the night my daughter lost her life, there was a bartender. They should have cut them off and called the law and had them arrested. There needs to be guidelines. It needs to be set in stone, and it needs to be ingrained in us as human beings, not just law enforcement, but in bystanders. It's none of my business, you know. We need to, and I don't know how we accomplish that. I don't, other than education, and it needs to start young. We will teach about drugs and alcohol in our school systems. The red, and what is it? Somebody help me. The red whatever campaign in the schools about drugs.
Dare.
Don't take drugs. Thank you. But we don't teach what a healthy relationship is. Some of these people, these young kids going to school, they may think the way daddy treats mom is fine because that's what they know. They don't know that that's abuse. So if we don't teach the basics, and it needs to be taught probably in 3rd or 4th grade and start at that level to where they understand what a relationship is. Otherwise, how are we ever going to change our world? I think it comes with education all the way across the board.
Well,
Tammy, I want to add to that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Audrey.
No, go ahead.
I actually spoke with an officer about this and the numbing, the complacency. He was like, would be at a murder call or murder scene, and him being on the force 20 years, he's eating a sandwich, and the rookie's over there throwing up in the bushes. Because I believe we do lose that compassion, we lose that sensitivity, and it's not only that, it's the media. It's in music, it's in TV shows. Domestic violence and addiction has become so normalized that nobody does anything when they see it.
Desensitized.
There you go.
Exactly.
That's a good word. Yes.
And so I think that you're so right on, Gabby, that we're so desensitized that we're like you said, well, I'll let somebody else say it, but it takes 2 seconds to call anonymously. If you don't want to get involved, you can call anonymously, do a care check. Or what is it called? Where somebody goes and
welfare check.
Yes.
I mean, and I will say this, a lot of families know that there's something going on and don't do anything about it. I will say that, I will be honest and say my family, they knew, but I became such a professional at hiding it and pushing them away. Well, obviously also he was isolating, but I don't think that they had the tools to even, help me. So, education, but also accountability. Like, I know my next door neighbor, not for real, but if my next door neighbor was, I heard yelling and I knew that there was abuse going on, I would call anonymously.
Right.
And because I couldn't live knowing that my next door, especially like 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men, those are outrageous statistics.
Okay.
Like breast cancer awareness and all of that. Let's talk about like 1 in 3, 1 in 7. And those are reported cases. What about all the men that, that are not, the cases that are not being reported? This is something that we need to, yes, TV and life and the news is all desensitizing, but come on, we need to have some accountability and reach out to our fellow, people and do something.
Right.
How about the fear of those consequences?
Yeah, that's what I was fixing to touch on.
So,
yes. Next.
So now you are scared to, and this goes across the board. This is law enforcement, first responders, everybody. We are so scared of the consequences of our decisions, whether that be, so for me, I don't know about you guys, but have you ever seen a couple arguing on the street and you're like, do I get involved? But if I get involved, how much worse is this going to be for her? Am I going to end up injured? What is the consequence going to be for me? And I think after that internal conversation, people tend to walk away because they don't want to deal with the consequences of helping. They don't want to deal with it.
It could save a life. It could save a
Had
life.
had a coworker call out an employer for screaming at his wife. He said, hey, you don't talk to your wife like that. Well, it wasn't too much longer, maybe a year, and they had phased this man out of his job. So, but he still stood up, and I admire the heck out of him because the employer was abusive. He was very verbally abusive to his wife. And this was an older gentleman, and he was like, you don't treat a lady like that. And he had the courage to stand up.
Right. I think sometimes we forget that having that courage to stand up may not change the results of the incident you're standing up against, but somebody else may see it and it may change their world. And sometimes also, like even with the wellness checks and stuff, I've seen this time and time again, or if you call on your neighbor or someone in your neighborhood, nothing may be done in that moment when the cops arrive and everything like that. And so it gets very frustrating because you see that, okay, nothing happened this time. But a lot of times, somewhere in the background within a week or two or so, that person, it's enough, it made them think. And they end up leaving. Right. They may not leave in the moment, but it creates something that they have to think about and maybe later leave during that time. And as advocates, we've seen that lots of times. So, encourage people to say something. Don't be afraid to say something. So how, with addiction though, isn't there an added level of like, if you call law enforcement to report that you have been abused, but yet you're drunk or you're high or whatever, you're afraid you're going to go to jail?
Absolutely.
So like, let's touch on that some and like how law enforcement could help in that way. I know some law enforcement, they're just going to take whoever to jail, but there's a lot of, I see the tide turning in some areas where they're not treating these victims like they're just some kind of felon. And they're actually trying to get them help. But what do you ladies think about that and those kinds of programs? What can we do to help that along? I mean, fear is real, right, Gabby?
I think the hardest for me was somebody was going to take my kids. Right. And I think that really has to stop. Now, I am not saying that kids should not be removed from a life-threatening situation. They absolutely, positively should be. But if you see their primary caregiver, whether it be their mother or their father, is addicted to drugs and being abused, come on now, the cops are coming to your house 5 times in the last 6 months. They know you're being abused. They know you're drunk. They know, but you're so terrified to reach out for help because then you feel like you're going to lose your children. You're not going to be able to take care of them. Somebody's going to take that away from you. So I think there needs to be more intervention as far as court-ordered help. Like not only, okay, we're going to put you, the abuser in jail for 6 months, but I'm also going to give you, the mom, court-ordered mandatory therapy. Mandatory. You need help. You need some help. You need some help to get through this and to deal with this. So I think more giving people the resources and the help as opposed to punishing them for coping the only way that they know how to cope would really help, people to leave relationships and to come and to ask these officers that are pulling up for help. Like, I just need help.
Well, and I think a good point that this struck in my head is, we know a lot of officers and first responders have addictions themselves from the trauma they see and experience. So if they could just relate to the victim on that level of if the trauma they see working in this day to day has brought them to that point where they struggle with addiction or something like that, then maybe they can see that the survivor would have, victims have the same thing going on. They're so being re-traumatized again, and this is their coping mechanism. Right. And sometimes I think that just some empathy for the victims would go a long way to help with that. Tammy, what were you going to say?
I can't think right now. I'm sorry. I've got the sniffles. I need to blow my nose.
Oh.
Allergies are killing me. I'm over here going. I'll pass on this one for a minute.
Okay.
I was going to say, like, okay, for the police officers or law enforcement that are being called multiple times, at what point is there an intervention that happens where they're like, okay, 3 strikes, you're out, we can then leave a card, you have to follow up with child protective services or whatever? At what point, like, can we get to a point where they are then handing over another resource where they're responsible to follow up? Whether it's child protective services, someone that says it comes in partners with, so that there's intervention. At what point, like, maybe it's like the 3 strikes rule, where then they are responsible for following up. CPS gets involved. They do an investigation, even if nothing happens, at least there is something. Right now, there is nothing. How
Right.
can they be called multiple times over and over with there not being any intervention?
Yeah.
Even maybe an advocate within the police force. Because when
Yes.
anybody hears CPS or DHS or whatever your area calls it, a mother automatically goes into panic mode. I know I do. And my kids are pretty much grown. But if you mention social services to me or CPS or whatever, I go into absolute panic shutdown moment. Everything's fine. Hold on. Wait, let me fix it. Like, I'm good. But advocates within the police force that will actually come back and reach out, all they have to do is run a report. Like, the report shows the calls, the number of calls to the addresses. Heck, 911 will tell the officer we've had multiple domestics to this address. But an advocate that comes out from the police station, not in uniform, not with a gun on their hip, being intimidating, like, I'm going to lock you up, but come and talk to these victims or to these survivors. And, not only the survivors, maybe even, I don't know about the abusers, but to come and talk to the family. What can we do to better serve you in the police station, in the police force, not in the social services? Now, if it needs to be escalated into a social services or a CPS situation, then of course that should be done. But other than that, just having somebody come to advocate, and even, I don't know if it's the shelters working with the police agencies or the courts.
Yeah, there's a lot of states, not all the states, but there are a lot of states who, during a domestic violence call, they are required to give the information from their local crisis center or shelters, and then those areas follow up. But I'm thinking, from what I see in some of that a lot of them need a lot more. If we're talking 80% of these calls are involving alcohol or drugs or whatever, that there needs to be maybe some cross training there of not just domestic abuse, but dealing with the addiction. And I don't know that we have thought that far ahead or are doing that as a society quite yet. I think we separated them, like they're separate,
we don't see them
isolated, and we are not seeing that bigger picture. Right. Yeah. So
we're not dealing with prevention. We're just dealing with the aftermath.
Right.
We need,
which goes back to education.
Right.
Back to education.
Prevention advocate.
Gabby, here in our city, something that you said, we have a family violence advocate that works in our police station. And I'm not to talk bad about our city. They remedied this situation really quick. We have somebody that's there. At the point this time, it was 5 days a week. So the police were, a 911 call was made. The report was taken, and it was supposed to get transferred also, as a follow-up with the family violence advocate through the PD. And there was nobody there on the weekend. So it wasn't until Monday or Tuesday of the following week that they finally reached out to make contact with the victim, and the victim was dead. The thing was, there was nobody there in that department on weekends and nights. Our
Right.
county and city remedied that immediately. Her last name, her name was Nidia Villarreal, but she created change in the city. She created change in our county and the way that people look at that. And I think that no matter how small, I don't know where this funding comes from. I don't know where our city or county gets the funding for this special section in our police department, but I don't care how tiny your county is. It's worth going that extra mile.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
worth finding the funds. If Corpus Christi, Texas can do it, why isn't it in every town? Why isn't it
Right.
everywhere?
Right.
Because unfortunately, in this country, you and I, Tammy, especially know this. For real change to happen, someone's got to die.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't understand that whole concept. For real change to happen, somebody has to die in order for it to affect the people in that society enough to create the change. And so I guess it's just us advocates having to just keep raising that voice, and maybe somebody will start to listen before we get to that point.
Thank you.
Right.
You know, the lives that could be saved. Right.
I wish that I could take so much of the proactive stuff that this county and city does for domestic violence victims and then take it to all these little small surrounding cities and counties and teach them how to do it. Because we have things moving forward for the good. They're trying. Yes, we still have losses. But I'm living in a community that it's constantly evolving. And you're right, Tara. Somebody has to die. A tragedy has to strike. These children are left orphaned because mommy's gone and daddy's going to prison. They're orphaned.
Mm-hmm.
But I see that I'm living in a community that I'm so proud to say that they're doing what they can. It's still not enough. It won't be enough until we stop losing loved ones to domestic violence and until we stop tolerating the abuse, period. But we've got to just keep trying and keep changing and keep creating.
No,
I think something else that's really big on that just came to mind, Tammy, is stop making abuse and addiction a social class issue. So let's be honest here. The lower economical class in this country, if the police show up and they're drunk, they're high, they're fighting, they all go into jail. Everybody's going to jail. You get handcuffs and you get handcuffs. But or just the man goes to jail, or, whatever may happen. But in higher society, economical classes, it's not handled that way. It's, he just had one too many. He's fine. He's a reputable member of the community. He doesn't have a record. For gosh sakes, he works with the mayor. It's not handled the same way.
There's
right. Just make them pay the fine, give them deferred adjudication, and let them go on.
So until everybody is on the same platform in the same wavelength, and to understand, you don't have to be rich or poor to be an addict. You don't have to be rich or poor to be an abuser. And for police officers to have that bias removed, that he's upper class, he would never. How could he? But that's who does. And
they need to be trained to not take their judgment into it. It's not up to them to judge.
It's not even being
to do their job.
So what I've learned about bias is it's not training bias out of you, because that's impossible. You cannot train a bias out of somebody, but you can train them to recognize when they are being biased. Am I handling this call the same way that I would handle the call for somebody else in another area? Am I handling this call the same way in every situation? And being able to learn and identify your own bias is, I think, a wonderful tool for law enforcement, as far as when we go back to education and back to training, that training them to notice and recognize their bias, or to notice and recognize when they're too biased and they need to step away and give the case to somebody else, is, I think pivotal in change and teaching them to understand I'm biased right now. And that's okay, but I'm going to give it to this person who may not be so biased.
Well, just understanding that domestic violence, addiction, all of those things do not discriminate against race, class, socioeconomic status, religion, gender, all of that. It's education, and like you said, training them. They do not discriminate. It's across the board. It's handled very differently, but not discriminated against.
Right. So, in closing, ladies, what kind of hope would you tell somebody who's experiencing domestic violence and addiction there is for them? What is there that they can, maybe see something down the road that they can't see right now, to provide them some kind of hope out there?
You're one decision away. It's one decision away. Sobriety is beautiful.
Yes.
There's so much light on this side of it. That's a tough one. Sarah.
It is tough.
Yeah, just for me is you got to just hold on. Just hold on. You got this.
Well, and there's help available, right?
Right.
And Audrey, what were you going to say?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I feel like we don't give ourselves enough credit. We have endured the fight of our lives.
Yes.
We've already conquered that. We're surviving. If we can get through that, all we need to do is take one step in the right direction, and that's for ourselves. Get out. And it's just, and then once you do that, you take one step, and it's one step at a time. If we've gotten through that and turn around and looking like, oh my gosh, I got through that, I can do this. Because it's not as bad as they make it seem. They make it seem like we can't live without them, and if we can get through what we've been through, we can keep going, and it's one step at a time, and I said earlier, like, there are days where I'm like, oh gosh, how am I going to get through this day? Life sucks and things come at you. And believe me, I think of sobriety every day. Every day I have to make a choice to say, I have to do this. I can do this. And sometimes it's just stopping and giving myself that time to turn around and look and say, okay, I got through all that crap. I can get through this too. I think that sometimes it gets so big that we forget that we can believe in ourselves.
Yes.
Survivors. And I think that we forget also that they needed us. There was something that they didn't have in themselves that they tried to snuff out of us. They needed us. So if we can actually see that we have that strength inside of us, we can make the decision to get out, to break the cycle, to get sober, to turn around and help someone else. But we just have to see that we have that strength inside of us. And sometimes it's just saying, hey, I've already endured the fight of my life. This is going to be easier. Or maybe just, taking that moment to say, okay, I need to break this cycle too. I broke domestic violence, and now I have to break addiction, or whatever it is. It's just actually finding the strength inside of ourselves to say, I can do this. I'm a survivor. I'm a fighter. I can do this.
Right.
Ladies, I would say, gosh, y'all make me proud. 5 seconds, Tara. That's all it takes when we're on the edge of that decision, whether it be a good or a bad decision. If we can stop for that 5 seconds and take a really deep breath, close your eyes and ask yourself, how will this affect the world around me?
Right.
And for 5 seconds, think about that and allow yourself to openly think about the good and the bad, which way this can go. We would live in a much better society. The world needs you.
Yes.
With me. We're all four here for a reason. Otherwise, our addictions and our abuse would have taken us out. So if somebody's sitting there and they're on the verge of making a decision, close your eyes and think about it. And ask yourself, how is this going to affect the world around me before you make that decision? And while you're doing that, when you open your eyes, think there is somebody out there that needs you. You may not have met her or him yet, but they need you to be here. And nothing you've been through, no matter how bad, isn't going to be used for a positive. God took everything negative in my life and turned it into a positive. And he's got, that is there's your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Take that 5 seconds. I'm sorry, I'm super emotional.
No, it's okay.
Right.
I love, Tammy, how you broke that down into 5 seconds. And that's really, I think, what it is for an addict in recovery, trying to achieve recovery, or for a survivor in an abusive relationship, leaving an abusive relationship, having left an abusive relationship, is breaking down everything into small bite-sized pieces. You know, there's this old adage, how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah,
One bite at a time.
At a time.
exactly.
You know, and that's really what it is breaking everything down into one bite at a time, one moment at a time, one decision at a time, and not worrying yourself with the huge big picture, but just worrying yourself and dealing with and getting through the moment, getting through every 5 seconds. And sometimes that's all you can do is get through from 60 seconds to 60 seconds. And hey, guess what? I got to go to sleep today. I made it through every one of those 60 seconds and I get to do it again tomorrow.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, ladies, thank you for the discussion. I think this was really great. I hope somebody out there will hear it and get the kind of, inspiration and help that they need. So thank you, everyone, for joining our broadcast. Please check us out on our social media pages. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, and our website, www.breakthesilencedv.org. And please donate to our programs. We have really great programs out there that could need your help, that help survivors become thrivers. And today, I think that's an incredible thing to offer to society, is healthy, thriving relationships. So please check us out, and thank you.